Welcome to Outside the Circle. Tonight we will be wrapping up Sermon on the Mount, and today's pretty loaded. Jesus gives us four big final statements to kind of wrap up everything that he's been talking about with Sermon on the Mount, and honestly, he seems to bring the heavy material at the ending, kind of saving the best for last, so to say. So, a lot of tonight is going to be kind of a tough pill to swallow to an extent, at different parts, and other parts, honestly, should kind of terrify us, honestly. Um, I think it can terrify me, but today we really, you know, the main thing he kind of really pushes today is what kingdom living is all about, and like kind of what the kingdom of heaven is really all about. So this lesson isn't exactly for the faint of heart, so you've been warned. So let's just go ahead and dig into it, and we'll break it apart from there. So we're going to be in Matthew 7, starting in verses 13 and 14. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few who find it. So here's the terrifying truth, number one, really, out of this one, is that as dumb as it may sound, but it really is a stairway to heaven and a highway to hell. Like, yeah, I went there, but it's fine. But it does paint the right picture here, you know. Scripture's clear that hell is enlarging daily, and honestly, that should terrify us. As believers, that should rock us to our cores. You know, that there's people every day heading to hell, you know. And if it doesn't bother us, then we really need to check our hearts, because if we truly love Jesus, it should tear us up to know that people are going to be separated him for all of eternity. You know, and we know that's not the Father's heart. We know being separated from God is not what God desires. We see that in Timothy, where, you know, God wished none shall perish. And so if we're okay with like, oh, hey, people are going to hell, like, we're not in line with the Father's heart. And as we've talked many weeks before, like, that's where we're supposed to be. So if we're not, we still need to get that taken care of if we haven't already. But, you know, that's what's at stake here, you know. Um, like I said from the beginning of this whole session, really, is that this ain't your grandma's religion anymore, you know. Like, Jesus is changing things and getting us to understand the larger context of what God really wanted from us, not just hokey religion, but true true relationship, really, at the end of the day. Um, you know, and that's kind of thing. This isn't just a say the right things, have the nice words, like whatever. Like, this is genuine faith and belief in God, you know. And so it changes us from just taking things lightly to understanding there's real stakes involved. Like, this is real, you know. People's eternities are on the line, and we just sit in our pews and listen to our nice worship music and be like, yes, Jesus is good and I love him. But yet we aren't really out there trying to win the loss, you know. We don't do that as often as we really should. You know, we live these cushiony Christian lives where, you know, it's more focused on us and what makes us feel good, instead of worrying about the fact that, you know, our neighbors could be going to hell. You know, our friends could be going to hell. Shoot, even worst of all, our own family members could be heading to hell. And we just kind of don't care, because, like, well, I went to church this week, I read my Bible, had some nice worship session, it was good, made me feel good. And then we move on with our days. And that really should bother us. And if it doesn't, then again, we have to have a whole different conversation right now. You know, because a Christian who isn't sharing Jesus is like the doctor who can cure cancer and just sits there and doesn't share it. It's like, you would probably say that person's evil. Like, oh, hey, he can cure cancer and, like, we'll never have a problem. And yet if he does nothing with it, you would probably sit there and say he's evil. But it's like, that's where we're at. If we say we believe in Christ, we say we love Christ and we believe in him, then we, quote unquote, have the cancer or the cure to cancer to share, and yet we're not sharing it, you know. But ours is even bigger because like we have the cure to everything, so to say. Not necessarily true, not saying everyone will be healed because of us. Obviously not because of us, it'd be Christ through us. But not like that. But again, the disease that all mankind deals with of sin, like we have the cure. We know the cure. And yet we're not doing anything about it. And so if we're not doing anything, then we're just as evil as the doctor who doesn't share, I mean, again, we know the one that cures the soul, the one that purifies people, the one who can cure anxiety and fears and pain and trauma and hurt and, everything else under the sun. And yet we don't move, So if we're going to call that doctor selfish, then what does that make us? Because I'd be willing to go as far as saying that just makes us downright evil, If we know the truth and we sit on our hands and don't share it, knowing the outcome is, hey, if you don't share it and they don't accept Christ, they're going to burn in hell for all of eternity. I'd say that's pretty evil if you ask me, I mean, you really have to ask yourself, like, how much do you have to hate someone to not share Jesus with them? Because at the end of the day, I feel like you have to. Like, we make it complacent, like, well, it's not that I hate them, I just don't say anything. But it's like, in a way, you have to hate someone if you know they're going to hell and you choose to do nothing about it. Like, something's got to click, I mean, you might not say you hate them because there's no true feeling there, but it's like, to an extent, if you're not sharing, what else are you supposed to call that, knowing that's where they're heading and not doing anything about it, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I mean, I know my toes are really feeling like they're getting stepped on. I don't know about y'all, but mine definitely are. When I was going through this, it definitely was very much stepping on my toes. But I mean, seriously, we have to ask ourselves, if we have the answer to cure, every trouble that someone can face, and we keep it to ourselves, I mean, the audacity we have to do that. Like, oh, hey, I got my get out of hell free card. I'm not going to share it with you, though. I mean, the audacity, Christ didn't save us just to sit here and not do anything about it. We're called to be his hands and feet in this world, and that means we need to be moving. We need to be working. I mean, like it says here, the road to destruction is massive, but the road to life is narrow, Through Christ, anyone can enter that narrow gate. There's no limitation that anyone can enter through Christ. But we have to be the hands and feet of Jesus on earth, Kind of a common trend in this whole Sermon on the Mount, if you really get to it, I mean, that's where Jesus has been kind of getting us to this whole time. And so he's just very clear up front, like, look, I am the gate, so to say. He'll say that later on, not in the Sermon on the Mount, but later on in his ministry, he talks about that being the gate. Like, he is the gate to heaven, as far as entering through him. And so even though the gate's narrow, anyone's allowed through it through Christ. But yet, sadly, it is a narrow gate because we're not out there doing what we're supposed to, And I mean, again, I feel like that's got to be convicting. Again, I feel convicted by it just when I was putting all this together. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you guys aren't. Hope it kind of is convicting, because we need to get out there, guys, So, but are we good so far? I feel like some people are probably like, maybe I want to turn this one off, because this is just the first point, guys. There's still more to come, so let's keep going. Picking up in verse 15. Be on your guard against false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce good fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that doesn't produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, so you'll recognize them by their fruit. So here comes terrifying truth number 2. there are many false prophets, and there will be many false prophets. Like, this isn't just a one and done thing. It's not like, oh, hey, there were at this time. No, there always will be, you know? And what makes it worse is they will look like, sound like, and even act like most of us Christians do. Now, that's kind of a bad commentary on us, kind of a good commentary on them. They look and sound and act like us, and if we're doing what we're told, that's kind of a good thing, I guess, on their part, that they can fake it that well. But sadly, a lot of times the reason it's so easy for them to do all that is because we're not living like we're supposed to. So they don't actually have to try that hard to look and sound and act like a quote-unquote real Christian based on how a lot of us act, you know. But, I mean, that's exactly what Jesus is getting at here, when he's saying that they're wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, that's what that means. Is on the outside, they look like a sheep, you know. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. But in this case, if it walks like a sheep and acts like a sheep, it still could be a wolf in sheep's clothing, you know. You know, in fact, it's very clear that it's a wolf seeking to devour the sheep. This isn't just like a wolf that's like, hey, guys, I just want to party with you guys, so I'm going to look and sound like you. No, it's someone who's coming in there to intentionally cause problems, to intentionally, you know, inflict harm. Like, they're not harmless enemies. They're very active and seek to destroy us, you know. And what's really bad is they're not even the outsiders like atheists or other religions. You know, we easily can recognize those people. You know, we can sit there and say, well, yeah, they're clearly not us. We're not listening to those guys. And those are the easy enemies to pick out. But they're a lot harder when they look, sound, and act just like us, you know. I mean, these people are in churches, you know. They might even be in your own church for all we know. You know, shoot, there might be some in ours. Hopefully not, but... you know, sadly, where God moves, Satan likes to tamper with, you know? And so, you know, there could be for all we know. Again, hopefully not. But, you know, at the end of the day, they hide among the flock. And really, they can strike out of nowhere. And sadly, they can leave the whole flock in a mess if they're not careful. You know? I mean, one little thing could cause a ripple or a division within a church simply because of one act of one of these wolves, you know, and that's why they're so dangerous, you know. Now, fortunately, Jesus also makes it very clear that their fruits will expose them, you know. Honestly, think back to the session one when we talked about fruits of the Spirit, you know. The sheep will display these fruits of the Spirit, whereas the wolves will display fruits of the flesh. They may fake the fruits of the Spirit from time to time, but at their core, they will show that they ultimately just go to the fruits of the flesh, you know. If anybody wants that list, you know, just refer back to Galatians 5. Talks about fruits of the flesh and then goes into fruits of the Spirit right there. You know, so while a wolf may speak, walk, and talk like a sheep, their fruit won't be the same as a sheep. So they may speak lovely things about God, but they'll have no self-control, you know. They may help out with the poor to look good, but they're not going to have patience, you know. Shoot, they may even serve in your church, but they won't have love. It'll be about themselves, you know. And the list can go on and on. I mean, we can come up with thousands of scenarios, you know. But the bottom line is that they will reveal themselves to true believers because true believers will see their lack of faith, you know, as far as like the lack of their fruit that they're producing, you know. That's why Jesus talks about a good tree will produce good fruit, you know. A bad tree can't produce good fruit. They may do things and say things and act certain ways that look like they're good fruit, but when you really inspect the fruit, again, it's not good. It's very much wicked and twisted and more self-centered and more self-involved usually. Whereas, you know, fruits of the Spirit are usually going to be pointed at other people. You know, it's all about other folks and serving others like Christ has called us to be. And so, you know, eventually their fruits will expose them. You know, we just have to be very wary of these false prophets to try to spot them and to recognize them before they sink their teeth too deep in, you know. So, yeah, there's a second terrifying truth. I don't know about y'all. Both of those are kind of terrifying. I mean, hopefully we're not taking those too lightly. So, let's keep going with the next few verses, starting in verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out enemies in your name, and do many miracles in your name?' Then I will answer to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers.'" Honestly, this is probably the most terrifying of all the passages from this section. I mean, I really want you to process this. Imagine living your whole life thinking you are following Jesus, only to get to those pearly gates, stand face to face with Jesus, and have him say, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." Whew. That's spine chilling right there. I don't know about you guys. Like, that's a genuinely terrifying thing to think of. Because again, these aren't people who did what they wanted when they want. I mean, technically they were. But these are people who are going to church daily, reading their Bible. I mean, again, it says, didn't we, prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, do many miracles in your name? Like, we're doing all this stuff. We're checking off all the boxes. Didn't I go to church every week? Didn't I read my Bible daily? Didn't I, give the most money for the Christmas offering? Whatever it is. Like, didn't I do these things? Didn't I serve on the most teams at church, And yet Jesus is going to be like, I'm sorry, who are you? That's terrifying. Because you could live your whole life in this comfort of thinking that you're on that stairway to heaven, only to realize you were never near it. Go back to when we discussed prodigal son not too long ago. I mean, that's the prodigal brother in his essence. Is the guy who was in the house, who was working daily, that was like, bro, I'm the father's favorite, so to say, because I'm doing all this. And then when he sees the prodigal son return, he's like, "Dad, what are you doing? Throwing all this party, giving him all this nice stuff? Like, he walked out on you. What are you doing?" And the father's like, "Well, yeah, he's my son." But yet the son that was there doing everything right, the father's like, "I don't even know you." Like, that's terrifying. That's genuinely terrifying. Because, again, the brother is just as far from the father's heart as the prodigal son was. But he was in the house. He did the work. He was right there with the father the whole time. And yet he was not even near him in a spiritual sense. That's what Jesus is getting at here, is the people who are in the house daily, doing the work daily. But their heart is so far from the Father's heart that he's like, "I don't even know you." That is absolutely terrifying. Because I don't know about you, but I want the other statement from Jesus when I see him face to face. I mean, that's just insane to think about, But at the end of the day, it's all about people who are in the Father's house but are focused on themselves and not the Father, These are the Sunday Christians who say and do the right thing and think, "Oh, it's okay." But in reality, they're caught up in the things of God and not God himself. And those are two vastly different things. And sadly, there's a lot of people who are going to miss heaven because they don't know how to tell the difference between the two. I mean, as we've seen from the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus isn't looking for religious people who do the quote-unquote right things. Jesus is looking for genuine hearts that are surrendered to him. This goes all the way back to week 1 of Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus flipped everything on its head that says, "You think I want this, you think I want that, you think these are the kind of people I want? No, these are the kind of people I want. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the humble," right? Those are who he wants. Because they're genuine people with genuine hearts that are surrendered to him, not to themselves, not to the things of God, but to God himself. You know, I mean, it's all about Christ at the end of the day. You know, not the things of Christ, but Christ himself. A while back, I heard a pastor named Alistair Begg. Alistair Begg. And he once said that if we get to heaven and they ask us how we deserve to be there, if our answer is in the first person, then we've already failed. If we say because I had faith, or I believe, or any other I statement, then we're already in the wrong. And that's exactly what these people did. Again, didn't I prophesy in your name? Didn't I drive out demons in your name? Didn't I do many miracles in your name? It's all about what they did and what they believe they've accomplished to deserve it. But that's the absolute opposite of what the gospel says. The gospel says you can't earn it. In fact, the gospel really tells us we don't deserve it because we don't. God created a perfect paradise that we ruined. And yet he provided a way for us to be made right with him. And so it's not about deserve. In fact, that's literally the idea behind grace. It's not about what you deserve. It matters what Christ chose, and Christ chose to love us and to set us free from our sin so that we can be made right with God. So our answer must be in the third person because of him, because of what Christ did. The ones Jesus turns away here are the self-righteous who believe that their works and deeds could get them into heaven. But they never knew Jesus and his heart, which is why they're turned away. Like we've seen a lot of times, this is absolutely a direct shot at the Pharisees and Sadducees. Again, they're the kind of people that go to God and say, well, I did this and I did that and I was pure because of this. I was holy because of this. And yet they miss Jesus right in front of them. Jesus is the only way to heaven. Period. Let's get to the last truth. We'll pick it up in Matthew 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the river rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't collapse because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the river rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. And it collapsed with a great crash. This is honestly the least terrifying of the truths that we've talked about tonight, because they're pretty straightforward and not kind of disturbing to an extent when you dig into some of the other stuff. You know, I mean, the essence here is your foundation matters. If you build your foundation on yourself, you are building it on sand. And when God's judgment comes, it's going to destroy us and we're going to fall away. I mean, it's like a kid's sandcastle. When a hurricane comes up, it doesn't stand a chance. But if we build our foundation on the truth of Jesus and his words, then when God's judgment comes, we will stand. Not because of us, but because of Christ in us. Later on in Jesus' ministry, there's a moment where he asks his disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus tells them, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail. Christ is that rock. The truth of Jesus is that rock. When we build our foundation on that rock, the gates of hell cannot even prevail against it. Not because of us, but because of Christ in us. Christ has to be our firm foundation. And that's the key of all of this, is Jesus. Notice that narrow way to heaven is through Christ. How do you tell the false prophets? Because they don't have Christ in them. Jesus is the judge of humanity to decide who enters heaven or not. And Jesus is the firm foundation our lives should be built on. Jesus is the key to all of this. In fact, look at the ending, starting in verse 28. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teachings. Why? Because he was teaching them like one who had authority, not like their scribes. The people left there understanding that Jesus wasn't just another scribe, wasn't just some other teacher, wasn't some rabbi, wasn't, whatever other kind of people at this time were sharing things. Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, again, rabbis, just teachers, whoever. Anyone who read the Holy Scriptures. But he spoke like one who commanded authority with what he spoke. He wasn't just quoting what he's heard. He wasn't just phrasing what has been. He spoke with authority. Why? Because he is the Word. He and God are one and the same, and therefore commands authority with his words on the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, as we're kind of closing out, is loaded with many things. As you see, we've stretched out into 7 weeks, and honestly, we could have stretched out even further because there is a lot to unpack there. We just didn't really have the time, so kind of had to group things together. But like I said at the beginning of this, Jesus comes onto the scene here showing that this ain't your grandma's religion anymore. He came to get back to the heart of what God designed. And I'm willing to bet that something in one of these lessons hit a little close to home for you. I know some did for me. Honestly, just getting these together, there was some that I'm like, I don't even know if I can teach on this because my toes hurt too bad to do anything about anything. It sunk deep. So I challenge all of us to take these lessons to heart. This is straight from Jesus himself, And he's trying to say something that you and I really need to listen to today, or even one of the other lessons during this section. Don't ignore it. Lean into it, embrace it, pray on it, and let Jesus change your life. That's what the Sermon on the Mount's been about, is a changed life in Christ. Y'all take care.